Hello, Coolman229 here, another Topic of the Week video. I apologize that the fan being on messes with the sound a bit, but it's really hot in here. This topic is submitted by Tumblr user fullysowerewolf, and their topic is, I'd like to request a topic about silent protagonists. What makes a good silent protagonist? What makes a bad silent protagonist? What examples can you think of? And what struggles does a writer/developer face in making one compared to a normal, voiced one? Silent protagonists are generally something that I personally don't mess around with too much in my own writing, mainly because there is a difficulty with them in that they don't speak. It's so much easier to characterize and develop a character and even use them in a story when they speak. Now, there are plenty of different types of silent protagonists. There's really a spectrum to this. You've got your true silent protagonists who just never talk. They just don't. Then you've got the more pseudo-silent protagonists who may not specifically talk, but they're obviously talking in the story. One of the best examples I can think of this has to be Link in the Legend of Zelda series, especially in recent games. Breath of the Wild probably has the best example of this, because Link doesn't talk. He doesn't have any like voice acted lines like the other characters do. But he does have dialogue options, and a couple of the Zelda games have had dialogue options, like Breath of the Wild and Skyward Sword, that really kind of characterize Link a little bit more, and it is made clear through the other characters and diaries and stuff that Link does talk. He's just normally quiet. It's actually more of an in-universe thing, that he just doesn't talk a lot, which is a nice way to sort of tie that in. But one of the biggest problems with writing a silent protagonist, and I say problem as in when you're trying to tell a story, is that you can't use them to directly initiate a lot of stuff. They can't talk to characters really. So that does make it a bit difficult if you want them to be doing stuff. This is why I know we're going to be talking a lot about video games, because I can't really think of too many characters in like TV shows or movies, especially protagonists who don't talk. But it is done more in video games, because in video games, as opposed to other stories, you can really get away with this a lot easier because, well, it's about the game. Even Half-Life 2, where Gordon Freeman doesn't talk, you still have a story because you have all these other characters that are doing stuff. They're talking to Gordon Freeman. They're telling him to do stuff. So everything is propelled and moved around. Even though Gordon is important and he's the one doing a lot of the legwork in the game and you're playing as him, he doesn't need to talk. You don't really need to do much as Gordon aside from play the game. That's because the game in and of itself, despite having a story, is very much focused on the gameplay. You can see stuff like this with, Mario and again Zelda, where you have characters who don't need to talk because the games themselves are focused on the gameplay. That's where you'll see a lot of the silent protagonists do really shine the most. Because, well, you don't need them to talk if you're playing a game. And a lot of developers do use this as a way to connect the audience to this character. They don't talk, so it's easier for you to essentially self-insert. I'm not the biggest believer in self-insert stuff, but because even stuff like Master Chief, who was built to be sort of a self-insert character, still talks. He doesn't talk a lot, but he does talk, and he is further characterized throughout the novels, like The Fall of Reach and First Strike. So he's not really a silent protagonist. He barely even would qualify as a silent protagonist. Maybe more of a quiet protagonist, but he still talks and makes quips and interacts with other characters. He just doesn't talk as much. It's just that during gameplay he doesn't really talk, so make of that really what you will. And actually, talking about some good silent protagonists, I think I've already talked about some of those. You have Gordon Freeman and Link, and even in a lot of cases Mario. And this is what's so great about video games, is that when you're playing these games, you can characterize them in ways that don't even require them to talk. This is why you see a lot of these characters are very expressive, and you see like Mario. You can just look at something like Mario Odyssey, and the Wind Waker was actually really good about this with Link. The characters are very expressive. You see how they feel about something, because they don't need to say it. They see it. You can see it in their faces, the way they react, even kind of whatever grunts or sounds they make. You can get characterization from that. That's something that's really important, because when the characters aren't speaking, if you want to actually develop this character at all and use them in the story, to characterize them, you're going to need to find ways that don't require them talking. It really requires getting creative. It's the way they look, the way they react to stuff, the sounds they make. Maybe not speaking, but excitement. You know. They do a little bit of that, and you know, especially I remember playing when I was first playing Wind Waker as a kid. When you look at Link's face and you're walking around, and you actually just look at Link's face, and he'll look at stuff, and even in the cutscenes, you see the way he reacts to stuff because of the cartoonish design. It really emphasizes his appearance and how he reacts to stuff. So it's easy to understand the character without them talking. It's actually really great, and I do really love the way they handled Link in Breath of the Wild, because you get a lot of his characterization through the diaries of the characters who he knew 100 years ago, Zelda, the champions, and you get more. You get a lot about his character from those, especially Zelda's diary, which really is an eye-opener for his and even her character if you find it in Hyrule Castle, because you do find out a lot about his character, how he remains quiet, not because he doesn't really have anything to say, but because he's got such a burden on himself to be the hero. He is the reincarnation of, the chosen hero. He is Hylia's chosen. And shoot, there's a lot of pressure on him to, basically fight Ganon and be the hero that all the Links are. So he shoulders these burdens quietly. It's a really interesting take on this, because it's made very clear that he does talk, and you do see sometimes in these backstories he talks quite a bit. Zelda, when she finally got him to open up, he started talking to her a lot about those insecurities, and it's really interesting because that is a way that you can really get around the fact that they're not talking. You just have everyone else talk about them. Now, you still have to handle this tactfully, because you can't just have characters exposit going, his favorite color is blue, he likes spaghetti. Like, you can't just have them talk about stuff. You have to weave it in. And in Breath of the Wild, those diary entries are actually really helpful in developing Link. And he is, in a lot of ways, one of the most well-fleshed out Links, because they actually put some work into, expanding on his character and the way he interacted. You see him in the past interacting with these characters in the cutscenes, but you get so much more from these diaries. And it's really interesting to read these, just because, wow, like there's so much more to Link than you really think. You also get a lot from the other characters talking about Link, and you have plenty of different characters who just make comments about him. And it's basically just inferring stuff about the character, and it really, when used effectively, it does help the audience understand them more without them even having to say anything. And stuff like that is much easier to do in a video game than, would say, a movie or a TV show, because, well, you have a lot more time. Because in video games, you have a lot more time to spend doing stuff, and especially in something like Breath of the Wild, which I spent like 200 hours playing, you have a lot of different characters and a lot of different NPCs that you can interact with that really helps flesh Link out. As far as bad silent protagonists, I can't really think of any. Mainly because there may be characters that are kind of bland in some video games, or maybe even more or less non-characters, but even then, games like that don't really have stories. Because something like Gordon Freeman, while there's really not too much to his character, he's not a bad character because he does exactly what he's needed to do in the story. He fits what he needs to do for the game and the narrative. It is hard to really to pick a bad silent protagonist. Yeah, I'm gonna probably take a pass on that because I genuinely can't think of any silent protagonists that I would consider bad. But if you do have some, if you have some examples that bugged you, you can please put them in the comments because I'd like to hear about that. But yeah, I've been talking about some of the struggles that you would do, and really depending on the medium, it really does change your struggle. Because if you have a movie where the character doesn't talk, you really, and especially as a movie, you have very limited time. You generally will only have a couple of hours at most for that character to get fleshed out. And I'm not really familiar with any silent protagonists in movies. Again, if you have any, you can comment below about those. But you really don't have a lot of time, and you have to do a lot to... You'd really have to have an effective actor who can really emote and show the character in a way that doesn't require you to, have them speak. TV shows would probably have an easier time with this, but it wouldn't be really as interesting if you were following a TV show with a main character who doesn't speak at all. I mean, sure, maybe for a time, but for the whole time, that might be a little difficult. But it being a TV show, it would also have the benefit of having a longer time to develop the character. And as long as you have an effective supporting cast, even in a movie, but mostly in a TV show, you definitely have a lot more that you could do to, build on the character. And especially if they're people who have known the character for a while, it would be easier to help develop them by using them to exposit about the character and help flesh them out. I guess books might be a little bit easier if you can show what they're thinking, but you just wouldn't have them speak. That actually would probably be pretty easy because you just don't have any dialogue, but you have them, you hear their thoughts in the in the writing. That would probably be a lot easier than a lot of other mediums because you could just directly show what they're thinking and you can characterize them through that. But really they seem to be the most effectively used in video games simply because, you're playing the game. It doesn't require the main character to talk a lot. And even a lot of characters who do talk, you can look at something like Sonic the Hedgehog, who's a very chatty character. Doesn't really talk a whole lot when you're playing as him, because it doesn't really matter. I mean, he may make some comments, but overall, it's not really that important. And shoot, you can even look at the older Sonic the Hedgehog games where Sonic really didn't talk. So, video games seem to be one of the best ways to do this, but it does require that you not make a narrative that requires the character to talk. Because a lot of them still would help, but to have them talk, it would require you to, if you're writing a story, because if you have a story at all, because sometimes video games are just the game, but if you don't have a character who talks, you need to make sure that it is built around the game itself. I mean, okay, if it's a video game, obviously, but, you don't really have as much, let's say, leeway if the character doesn't talk, so you generally need to have other characters, really propelling them. This is done in other Valve games like Portal, where you have other characters telling Chell what to do, but that's typically done anyway in video games, where you'll constantly have characters giving you side quests. So, as long as it's not required for you to do anything, any deep diving into the main character, you can generally get away with a silent protagonist. But personally, if I was writing anything from a show or a movie or a TV show or a video game, I wouldn't go for a silent protagonist. And I've never written anything or even come up with ideas for something that had a silent protagonist. Mainly because I don't really want to deal with those limitations. But that's just me. Other people might be more into that than I am. But really, yeah. It's an interesting topic to talk about, but not really something that I'm really into. I mean, I actually have been sitting on this topic for a little while just because I wasn't sure how I would approach talking about silent protagonists, just because it's not really something that I think about all that often. But it is interesting to talk about and to sort of engage in this. So yeah, bit of a fun topic, and I think that's about it for this one. If you want to submit a topic to me, you can comment below if you're on YouTube, or if you're on Tumblr, send me an ask, but topic colon, then whatever topic you want me to talk about. Or if you're on the topic submissions, or on my Discord, you can send topics to the topic submissions channel. Just make sure to follow the rules that I'll be posting down below. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, you can check that out here. I want to get that done. So do you have any thoughts on silent protagonists, good or bad? Please comment below. And thank you for watching.